RC from the Mountaintop Joiner Shop here. Welcome to the 6th and final installment of my Build a Wine Caddy using mostly hand tools series. Throughout this series I've shared all kinds of tips for building stuff like this by hand and also with a few power tools. And in this episode I have yet a few more to share as we put the top on this, we do some finishing, and even a little bit of leather work. So by the end of this episode, this thing should be all wrapped up and ready to go. I'm pretty excited about that. I hope you are too. Let's get started. Okay, so you should only have a few pieces left that are part of this project. One of them should be this 4.5 by 4.5 square by 1/2 inch thick piece that will eventually become the lid. And all we need to do to that is just make sure that it's flush to the side. So I might need to trim just a little bit off with my shooting board plane and then just soften the edges and smooth plane it, and that should be about ready to go. And then we should have a piece of scrap laying around that is from the original kind of skip plane stock that you started with. So this started as a 4/4 board and then it was skip planed before it was put out at the lumber dealer. And by the time I flatten this and get it ready for the project, it should be about 3/4 inch thick, and that should be fine. And what I want to do is cut this down such that it just fits inside the opening at the top of the wine caddy. And I've already covered all the techniques that will allow you to do this in the first couple episodes of this build series. So I'm not going to go over that again. What I think I'll do instead is a montage. Well, that was a nice little montage, and now it's time to take our lid and our insert that the top of the bottle is supposed to fit into and glue them to each other. And while I'm explaining my strategy for this, I need to get the glue from the bottom of the bottle to the top of the bottle. The way I like to do that is just to make sure that the end is closed and drop it into a dog hole and let it settle. Here, I'll put it back there. So there's a lot of ways you could go about trying to get this all lined up here. And ultimately, it doesn't matter if the measurements from end to end and end to end are all equal. What matters is that this lid lines up with the body of the wine caddy in a way that the sides are flush and the front and the back both have about the same amount of projection and everything looks nice and even. So this is what I would like to do in order to get this lined up without having to measure or leave marks I could show later or any of that. So my glue is ready to go. Open up my nozzle and I'm going to put a little bit of glue around the bottom side of the insert, and I'm trying to do this in a way that I'm kind of staying away from the edges because I really don't want much in the way of glue squeeze out here, if any. A little glue squeeze out towards the center is fine, but not on the edges because I don't want to accidentally glue this insert to the inside of my wine caddy. Now I'm going to line this up so that the grain is all running in the same direction between the two pieces and just kind of visually drop it on there. And of course, this is high glue, and this is kind of one of its best attributes is you can kind of rub this into place until it starts to tack up, and it's still movable. All right, so then I'm going to take my wine caddy, which is upside down, and drop it onto the top of that insert, just like that. And I'm going to make sure that's lined up on the sides here, nice and flush. And then I'm going to look from this side and see that the amount of projection front and back is about the same and that it runs parallel. It's not all crooked on there. So that's good and lined up right there. And then I'm going to press down on my insert and kind of move it around. And I'm starting the beginning of what's called a rub joint when you're using hide glue. You can't do this with PVA glue. But I'm kind of pressing and moving around that hide glue, and it's spreading out underneath there. And eventually you'll start to feel it start to grab. I can feel it start to grab right about here. Again, make sure I'm lined up. Everything looks nice. Then I'm going to press down with my fingers here. My fingers are long enough that I can lift the body of the wine caddy until it clears the insert and let go. Now this is perfectly lined up. And then I have my DeWalt F-style clamps, and they're already kind of open to accommodate the thickness of this whole getup. And I'm going to put those on there. And I'm going to keep a real good eye on this to make sure that it doesn't move. But because the hide glue has started to tack up already, I'm hoping the F-clamps don't cause anything to move out of place. So the pressure of the F-clamps is going to start that glue setting even more. I can see a tiny bit of squeeze out on the inside of the hole there. That should do it right there. But you know what? It's high glue. It's no big deal. I can take these F-style clamps off. And just to be sure myself, I can double check it again. Drop this over there. Make sure I can get this lined up the way I want. Same amount of projection. Everything looks parallel. And I can even repeat that process because the glue has started to set, but it hasn't set all the way. Now I know that's really going to stay put. And I'm going to go ahead and clamp it again. These little F-style clamps are great. The DeWalt's. There you have it. That's right where it needs to be, and I'm just going to leave that set to dry. All right, so the glue is set on my lid, and then I went ahead and sanded the lid and kind of eased all of the corners and the hard edges. And I gave myself a nice little paper cut with some 180 grit sandpaper. That was an experience I would rather not repeat. And now I am ready for the next step. So throughout this project and in previous episodes, I keep thinking that I'm going to put these screws in because I really like the way this looks with the screws. And I'm looking forward to having this look finished. But I'm realizing that it's still not time to apply screws because this is an opportune time to get some finishing done beforehand. If there were screws sticking out of here, when I apply my finish, it's more likely that the finish will pull around those screws, and it just makes it more difficult to apply the finish cleanly with all those little protuberances there. So I am going to leave the screws set aside for the moment and start my go-to finish for walnut. And that go-to finish is 3 parts The first part being Danish oil. So I'm going to use this natural Watco Danish oil to impart a lot of warmth and darken the walnut significantly. It makes a nice chocolatey brown. And then I'll let that set over the weekend and then come back and then go to my normal go-to finish, which is to apply some shellac and then cover that with some of my Vermont Natural Coatings Polyway. And I've done videos about finishes in the past and which ones I like and what I like to do, so I won't go over that again here. But because this is a process that requires me to wear a respirator, because the Danish oil is all kinds of nasty with its petroleum distillates and VOCs and whatever stuff you don't want in your body. So I'm not going to film this, but I will describe what I'm going to do. So I got my nitrile gloves. I got a scrap piece of cloth that I can rub the finish on with. I even have some sponges here that I can use to kind of get into those hard to reach nooks and crannies that just rubbing a finish on precludes you from getting into. And then I'm going to let that sit over the weekend to dry, because it does take quite a bit of time for an oil finish like that, or actually an oil and varnish mixture like this, to dry. So I'm going to give it some time to do that over the weekend. So that's my plan. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll come back at you on Monday. By the way, if you have any experience with Watco Danish oil at all, you'll know that these lids have a very strong tendency to seal themselves to the top of the can in a way that makes them almost impossible to get off again. And one of the ways I found around this, or so I think, I'm just still kind of trying this out, is to wipe the threads with some petroleum jelly, some Vaseline. This is like a little travel size of Vaseline. So when I'm done applying this finish, what I normally do is, wipe down the threads with a dry cloth or paper towel or whatever, and then apply some of that Vaseline to the lid. And I'm hoping that will allow me to get back in here again. And wow, yeah, okay, so that worked great. So word to the wise, get yourself some Vaseline. And who knows what else it might come in handy for. But using it for the threads on your Watco Danish oil is a great way to stop this lid from becoming one with the can and preventing you from using the rest of the can. So another tip for you. All right, well, it is Monday now, and now this is starting to look like walnut. If you recall, before I put any finish on it, it was almost tan. And with the Danish oil, it's brought out all those warm chocolatey brown tones that walnut is known for. So this is starting to look pretty good. And now I got out my beach towel that has my rainbow trout on it. If you follow my Instagram account, you've probably seen this towel featured in the background of many a build that helps protect the finish I've put on here so far. If I were to put this down on my bench top, and if there's any grit between it and the bench top, it can kind of get rubbed into the finish and kind of damage it. So I want to protect the finish that I've done so far by using my leftover beach towels. Now, I think I'm actually ready to apply some screws. I got all my stuff out for that. Besides the beach towel, I got a pair of dial calipers. I have the screws that I blackened earlier. I have an old, dirtied up, half dried out can of paste wax. This is good for that application. I got some blue tape, nice thin roll of blue tape. And then I have my Lutz 15-in-1 screwdriver. This is a multi-screwdriver that ratchets. This thing is freaking awesome. I will leave a link in the description for an affiliate link for this. This is such a good screwdriver. I have two of these that I've been using for well on a decade now, and they have handled all the abuse I could dish out and then some. They're still going strong. Those are great. And I also have sets of drill bits. So I have some regular twist drill bits and I have some brad point bits. And which ones I'm going to use are often dependent upon how large the divots are that I put in there to mark the locations of my screws with my little bird cage awl. If I mark them really deep, I might use a twist drill bit. If they're just little shallow ones, then I might use a brad point bit that I can drop that brad point right into those little divots with. So that's what I got going here. Then I'll bring you in a little bit closer and show you how I like to put screws into small projects like this. And the drill that I'm going to be using for this is an old Stanley 617 vintage make, this little egg beater type hand drill. This thing is super cool, and they're super fun to use, and they also give you a really good tactile feel for what you're drilling through. So I'm going to use this today. Any kind of power drill is perfectly usable for this operation, if not better. But I just really liked using these. And since I've set a precedent throughout this series of trying to use hand tools as much as possible, we use this today. So that's the drill I'm going to be using. So what I want to do first is take one of my screws and my dial calipers, make sure they're zeroed out, and I'm going to put the dial calipers right in between the threads on the screw. So let's see if we can get that in focus there. So the thin little jaws on the dial calipers are right in between those threads right there. And what I'm getting when I do that is 7/64. So I want to pre-drill my holes to 7/64. And so the only thing that's really biting in is the actual threads of the screw itself. That way I don't cause a wedging action when I drive that screw in that is going to split the thin stock that I'm making this project from. Now look at my little divots here. And I think for 7/64, let's see, I think I want to use a regular twist drill bit for that. I think that's a small enough bit that'll fit into these divots that I made. Yeah. And kind of help me get started in the right location. And I'm going to chuck that up into my egg beater drill. So the way I like to prevent this from turning when I'm trying to chuck up the bit is to grab the spin handle here and just pinch it like this. And that'll keep this from moving while I'm trying to tighten the chuck. Make it nice and tight that way. And then what I want to do is set a depth gauge of sorts with some blue tape. So I'm going to grab some blue tape like that. I'm going to look at how long that screw is and then put the blue tape right where the tip of the screw terminates. And for that I kind of have to do this off camera. So now I have a little blue tape flag put on here. And when I put the screw up against it, you can see that that flag just overlaps with the very tip of the screw a little bit. So that's my depth gauge, so to speak. And then I want to line up my egg beater drill such that I'm sighting right down the side of the wine caddy. And that keeps me vertical. I don't want to be angling this in a way that it pops out the side back here. That would be an epic disaster. So I'm going to sight right down the middle of these from this angle here and drop the tip of the bit right into one of those divots. And then I'm going to back up the camera and show you the technique I use to actually hold this steady. So the thing about these egg beater drills that people often struggle with is holding them steady while they're drilling. In fact, this egg beater drill had a little knob that threaded into the side of it that I imagine if you held onto and tried to drill a straight hole with would have been very difficult. I actually removed that little knob, it just unthreaded, and I actually used this circular recess here as a way to mount it into my tool cabinet. I don't use that knob at all. The one you want to use is the one at the top, like that. And even so, when you start to drill your hole, it's pretty easy still to be moving it all herky-jerky while you're trying to drill. In order to hold the drill steady, I came up with a way of doing that anybody can use. Basically, I just want to sight down the side of the wine caddy, so I'm holding it vertically this way. And then I'm going to put the back of my thumb up here against my forehead, just like that. Now I can sight down the side of the wine caddy and sight down the drill bit at the same time to make sure I'm drilling nice and vertical. And by stabilizing this whole situation against my forehead, and when you have a forehead as big as mine, that's a can't miss proposition. You can hold this steady quite easily. So I'm just gonna hold it like this and drill in until blue painter's tape just starts to sweep the dust off of the surface of the workpiece. By the way, if you thought that was a cool tip and you were wondering where that tip has been all your life, I'll tell you, it was in my YouTube shorts for quite some time before I shared it here. So if you're looking for tips that you might not see in other YouTube channels, I would go into my channel and look for the YouTube shorts. And over there I shared all kinds of tips that are a little bit unusual, but I would like to think very useful as well. So I would be remiss if I didn't point that out. Go check out my YouTube shorts, and there are plenty of tips there that you might dig on. So yeah, moving on. Another tip I almost forgot to share is that when you put the tip of a twist drill bit into one of these little divots, and if you just start running it forward, there's a chance that that cutting lip at the very tip of the drill bit can grab the wood fibers in a way that cause it to climb out of the divot and put that hole someplace you didn't intend it to be. So the way you can avoid that is to drop the tip of the drill bit into the divot and then actually run the drill backwards like this while applying just a little bit of downward pressure. And what that does is it compresses the fibers where the divot is to match the diameter of the drill bit in a way that helps center the drill bit better. And then when you run the drill forwards, not only will it stay in the location that you intended, but it also will put a cleaner entry hole. So if you're drilling a hole in a project that is going to be visible later, and you don't want the edges of that hole to be all torn up, that's one way you can avoid that. And this works for twist drill bits and brad point bits, especially brad point bits. A brad point that you run backwards will actually kind of pre-cut the edges of the hole. And then when you run the drill bit forwards, it goes in much more cleanly than it would otherwise. So I've already kind of run this backwards, but I'll do it again, like that, and then run it forwards. Okay, so I drilled all those holes to match the part of the screw in between the threads. That part of the screw in between the threads is called the root of the screw, and that was 7/64. But if you look at the screw a little more closely, you'll see that just above the threads is an area of the screw that is a little bit fatter. That's called the shank of the screw. That measures closer to 1/8. So if I were to drive this screw into the holes that I just drilled, there's a chance that the shank, because it's so close to the edge of the boards that I'm screwing into, can actually split the wood still. So I need to drill to the depth of the shank at the thickness of the shank, which is 1/8 of an inch. And that will make it such that there's very, very, very little chance that I'm actually going to split the wood that I'm screwing into. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to chuck up a 1/8 bit. I'm going to set the depth to the depth that this shank would penetrate into the surface and pre-drill that part of the hole as well. So there is my 1/8 drill bit with the tape on it set to the depth that is the length of the shank of the screw. Okay, so second verse, same as the first, except when you drop this into the hole to widen it and run it backwards, you're going to notice a couple things. One is because this drill bit is only 1/64 larger than the hole that it's being drilled into, running it backwards is actually going to set the bit right into the hole. It's going to compress the fibers around it. The other thing it's going to do is that when you start to run that bit forward again, it's going to grab those compressed fibers and it's actually going to pull the bit down into the hole. So you'll be to full depth before you know it. So what I like to do is run it backwards lightly and then try to not press down so much when I'm starting to run it forward. And you'll find that the bit pulls itself right to full depth with very little effort. So watch out for that. So right now I imagine somebody watching this somewhere is thinking to themselves, RC, is it really worth it to drill 2 different size holes for every screw that you're putting into this project? And the way I would answer that is, go ahead and take your chances and see if you split the end of one of these boards, how you feel after you've done that. And then I think you'll have your answer. So I like to err on the side of caution. I don't want any single one of the ends of any of these boards to split. So to continue in the spirit of an abundance of caution, I am now driving these screws after lubricating the threads of the screws with a little bit of paste wax. You can see my paste wax is super nasty and dried out, and I've never used it on a finished project to wax the surface. Instead, I just drag the threads through the paste and just kind of roll it into the threads like that. And that little bit of extra paste wax on the threads allows these screws to go in nice and easy. Now, it isn't as important for little screws like this as it is for big long screws that you're driving with a actual impact driver. That's the case where lubricating your screws really pays dividends. Here it's kind of optional, but it's just a habit that I've always kind of been in, so that's what I'm doing. And in the course of tightening these, I've discovered that when they're fully driven, and I'll go ahead and dry this so you can see what I mean. When that screw is bottomed out, right about there, the slot in that screw is nearly vertical. It's almost in line with the side of the wine caddy. And so I have enough leeway, especially with that paste wax in there, to continue tightening it just a little bit more until that screw head is perfectly vertical. And that being the case, I may as well keep doing that with all of these screws so that they are clocked. Clocking your screws just means that the heads of the screws are all oriented in the same direction just for the sake of appearance. And since these screws are mostly decorative to begin with, that's a technique I would prefer to use if I can get away with it. If the screws tighten in such a way that I couldn't get to either vertical or horizontal without over tightening the screw to the point where, I could strip the threads or something, then I won't do it. In that case, I am more in agreement with others that say that clocking your screws isn't really the right thing to do from a craftsmanship perspective, that tight is right. But in this case, I'm able to get it tight, which is right, and I'm able to get it clocked, which I have nothing that rhymes with to say. So, anywho, one last thing as I drive this last screw, and you'll see that I put enough paste wax on these threads that it's actually pushed out of the hole, and it's kind of squishing out from underneath the head of the screw. Now, I'm going to go ahead and finish tightening this. Now, you might be tempted to just kind of smear that paste wax into the surface of the Wine Caddy, and if it was your intention to just do Danish oil and then maybe wax it, then that's fine, but I want to spray this after the fact with some wax shellac. So what I'm doing is trying to get it off of there. So you can see I've kind of flaked it away instead of letting it rub into the surface, because I don't want it to impede the adhesion of the finishes that I'll be spraying it with subsequently to this. So that's that. All right, so I put the lid back on just to see how things are looking, and I gotta say, they're looking pretty dang good. I'm pretty happy with my decision to go with black hardware all around. I think that looks really good with the walnut. And so if you have a finishing regimen that you prefer, I would go ahead and use that in this case. And in my case, as I spoke to a little bit earlier, what I like to do with walnut is to start with some Danish oil to bring out those kind of warm chocolatey browns in the walnut. And then I like to spray it with a coat of de-waxed shellac, which does a couple of things. It brings out a little bit more depth in the color of the wood and acts as a binder coat that will stick to my final coat, which in my case is Vermont Natural Coatings Polyway. That gives it a lot of extra protection. What I don't want to do is finish strictly with de-waxed shellac, because what is the solvent for shellac? It is alcohol. And what am I going to be putting in this Wine Caddy? Alcohol. So I don't want to put something in the caddy that could potentially spill and eat through the finish. So I'm not going to stop with the wax shellac. I'm just going to use it as a binder in between coats of the Danish oil and the Polyway. So I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and go out back, and because I can, I'm going to spray this with my spray gun with some de-wax shellac and then some Polyway. And then when I finish that, I'm going to come back here and we'll start doing the leather work that's going to wrap this project up and make it a useful piece of art. Okay, so let's do some leather working and wrap this project up, shall we? So I've gotten out all the things that I think I'm going to need in order to accomplish this task, and we'll go through them so you can kind of gather this stuff up for yourself. The first thing I'll talk about is this cutting mat, and I got this at Joann Fabrics, I believe. You can get these at most craft stores. Failing that, you can certainly get it online. And for any of these things that I can find an affiliate link for, I'll go ahead and put that in the description to save you the trouble of searching it down. The cutting mat is pretty key for cutting and stamping our leather to size. And then as far as leather working tools go, I have a hole punch. Turns out if you try to drill through leather with a standard wood drill bit, the fluting catches the fibers in the leather and tears it loose and makes a mess. So we want to stamp holes in leather rather than drill holes in leather. And this is just a kind of a metal stem here that you can hit with a mallet on one end, and the other end you thread on these little inserts that come in different diameters for different size holes. And this one, I believe, is an 1/8 inch hole here. I also have an edge beveler. So all these pieces of leather have kind of sharp edges on them that I'll need to bevel over in order to make them a little bit nicer in the hand. And so that's what I'm going to use. This is a number 4 edge beveler. I also want to bevel my edges and make them nice and smooth. And for that, I'll use an edge burnisher. And this is just a little turned piece of wood, so you can do it by hand with different diameters, kind of cut into it for different thicknesses of leather. So you'll see that in action in a little bit. I have a rotary cutter. I absolutely love this thing. This is basically just a circular razor blade that you can extend out of the handle and use it like a pizza cutter. It's a very useful tool. And then I also have some leather conditioner, and this is just a combination of oils and waxes that kind of moisten the leather and help protect it from drying out over time. This one's by Dr. Jackson's. I got this at Tandy Leather back before Tandy Leather kind of went under. So I'm sure you can find a similar product to this. There are a lot of things you can use. You could use paste wax, you could use paraffin or beeswax or whatever. But I like that this is a combination of waxes and oils here. So you can search for products like these at weaverleathersupply.com as well. I have a regular, like tailors use, a tape measure, nice flexible tape measure. Then I have a long ruler, and then I have this basic carpenter square. I really like to use this for doing square cuts on the ends of straps and things like that. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a little bit. And this is just a basic hardware store one. And then I got out what hardware I think I want to use for this. So I have these screws here. So these are just long enough to go through the leather, but not all the way through the wood, just most of the way through the wood. And they are slotted heads, they're black. They have a little shank on them, so the threads won't cut into the leather later. I'm hoping that this works out fine, even though that's our countersunk. So I might regret this decision later, but we'll give these a shot because this is what I have handy right now. The leather I'm using is English bridal leather, and of course you can get this in different colors, but this is left over from commission work that I did a few years back. I did some ebonized walnut pieces that had this kind of reddish brown English bridal leather on the top of it, and this really pretty stuff, and it goes really well with the browns and the walnut, in my opinion. And so I got some scraps of that out that I think will be useful for this project. In fact, one scrap I found is almost the perfect width to match the thickness of the lid on the Wine Caddy. So this is what we're gonna do. First thing I'm gonna do is go over to my example caddy and measure how long that main strap is, and then we'll cut that out. So it turns out that the original strap is 18 inches long by about an inch wide. And so we're gonna mark that on this big piece here. So I like to mark on the back side of the leather with my pen where it's not gonna be seen after it's cut out and installed on the project. So starting from this corner here, oh, and by the way, I know that this edge here is a straight edge. That's important. If it's all wavy gravy, then you're gonna make a wavy gravy strap. And we don't want that. We just want a straight strap. So I'm gonna mark from the end, 18 inches, right here. Then I'm gonna take my square. I'm gonna line the long end of the square up with the straight edge on my leather. Get my rotary cutter, press down on this, and I'm basically gonna use this similar to the way you would use a marking knife. So move this over here where you can see it better. Probably take a couple passes because this leather is thick. It's gonna take a lot of passes. Holy cow. This leather's so thick. There we go. Now I'm through. All right, so that's 18 inches long. Now we need to cut it to width. And for that, actually, I'm gonna get another straight edge here. And I like to use thick rulers like this as, just like with that square, as cutting guides. So this ruler is like a good, like 1/8 of an inch thick. What I want to do is, using my square, is mark an inch down at this end. And I'll do the same at the other end. Then I'm gonna take the wide side and pin it down underneath this big, thick, straight edge of mine. By the way, I don't want to give you a false impression that I am some kind of pro leather worker. This is really basic stuff, bare bones. So I'm not doing anything too fancy, I'm just doing enough to kind of get the job done in a way that's satisfactory to me. So now I'm gonna have to cut this and again, make lots of passes. So I'm pressing down pretty hard with my offhand. And then I'm gonna go ahead and try to cut this out. So that ruler's lined up with the inch mark at both ends. And once you've kind of established the beginnings of a cut, hopefully the razor blade will continue to follow that as you go along. Now, as far as the ends being square, it's not super important that this is perfectly square because we're gonna actually round that over once we've made the marks and punched our holes. I need to mark where I'm going to punch my holes for these screws to fit through. To mark those holes, I want it to be basically halfway through the width of this and that same distance from the end. A 1/2 inch across. That is a 1/2 inch right about there. Actually, I forgot a tool to get out. We're gonna need one of these. So this is just a kind of a stencil for different size diameter circles. This one's made by Stettler, and these are pretty cheap, and you get them at most craft stores as well. And what I want to do is take the 1-inch one, and I want to line it up so that this point of the circle, this point, and this point are all right at the edges of the leather. Trace a round over, I guess it would be kind of like a bull nose, onto the end of the strap. And I'm going to want to do that at both ends, but let me show it to you real quick. So I'm going to remove all the material off the corners to make the end of the strap nice and rounded over at the top. Okay, so to punch my holes, I'm going to put my hole punch right over those X's I marked a little bit earlier, as close as I can get them lined up. I want to make sure that I'm not over a dog hole in my bench when I do this. Otherwise, the cutting mat will just give way where I'm punching the hole, and it won't really cut a clean hole. So watch out that there aren't dog holes underneath your cutting mat that are going to make this not work so good. I'm going to go ahead and line this up. And then I have my Wood is Good mallet, the 12-ounce mallet that I use for all of my woodworking, and I'm going to punch that right through. And keep an eye on it. And I've punched all the way through. I'll give it a twist and pop it out. And there is my hole. Focus. Thank you. I'll do that on the other side as well. Now, I want to take my rotary cutter and start nibbling away at the corners here until I have followed around. And you can't do that in one pass. You have to take little nibbles to round over the edges of these. Now, because my lines are on a dark piece of leather, you probably can't see my lines, but I'm basically nibbling off all the material outside of that half circle line that I traced earlier on. So I'm just going to go ahead and take a little bit off like this. And then a little bit more. And a little bit more. Just like that. And see how it's starting to look round? Even though it has facets on it, it's rounding off pretty nicely. And I'll continue to do the same all the way around. There are stamps, leather tools, that have a half round over like that. Let me see if I can show you an example here. Look at my leather working kit. So here's one here. This is for cutting the ends of strap leather, like the ends of belts. But this one isn't round like I want it to be. So because I don't have one that's round, I'm improvising and using the rotary cutter to kind of nibble off the ends of the corners until it matches up to the stencil that I drew earlier to make it look round. There's one of them cut there. And you can see that it's not, perfectly cut into a half circle. If I had a tool that did that, then it would probably look a little bit better. But to my mind, this is a handmade piece, and it's okay if it looks like it was handmade. So this is good enough for me. And after I burnish it and bevel the edges and all that, it'll actually look a little bit cleaner. It will improve a little bit from here, but still have a little bit of that handmade character, and that's fine. Okay, so now we're going to do some edge beveling on this strap here, and there are varying opinions about whether or not you should wet the edges of the leather before you apply a beveler to it. From my understanding, this is something that you might want to do when you're using vegetable tanned leather. This is bridle leather, and I've also heard people say that if it's wet, the leather tends to have a little more give to it and won't cut as cleanly. So there are varying opinions about that. I'm, again, not a leatherworking expert, but with this thick, stiff bridle leather, I'm going to give it a shot dry. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this edge beveler to the strap. I'm going to support it with my offhand, put my beveler at about a 45-degree angle and just push it through. And it appears to be cutting pretty nicely. Just like that. And now I've taken that hard corner off of there. And I'm going to want to do the same thing front and back, but first I have to work around the corner here. And it's pretty nice how easily cut leather is. It's kind of impressive how easy this stuff is to work with. Looking good. Let's do the back side as well, because when this is going to be held in the hand, it's going to be bent like this. And your hand is going to be on it. So if you have these sharp corners underneath your fingers, it's not going to be very comfortable. So I'm going to go ahead and take a middle section out with the beveler. Looks to be that I want my bevel to start about 3.5 inches in from the end, but rather than mark that using a square or a ruler or something with some ink where it may or may not be visible later, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that this cutting mat has a grid on it that is in 1-inch squares. So I'll grab my beveler, I'll put this down to the edge of a square like this, and count up 1, 2, 3.5, and I'm going to bevel from there on into the middle of the strap. Now I'm going to come down and do the same thing looking at the other end. So I have 1, 2, 3.5. I want to finish my bevel right in that spot there. Just like that. And I'm going to go over it again just to make sure that it cut nice and cleanly. So I'm going to do that same thing on the other side. Now if you recall, I'm using screws here that have a countersink to them. And I have no idea if I can countersink leather at all, but we're going to give it a shot. So what I have here is a countersink and a cordless drill. And this countersink is from Lee Valley, and it's got a hole cut through it that creates a kind of a cutting edge. So it's a single fluted countersink. And this thing really leaves a very clean hole on wood. I'm hoping this is sharp enough to cut the leather as well. So I'm going to go ahead and chuck that up in my cordless drill. And I'm going to hold this leather over a dog hole and slide all this stuff out of the way. So here is a dog hole that can support around the edges. And I'll hold it right over that. Make sure I'm cutting the right direction and try to cut a bevel. It's working. Sort of. Man, I think once I tighten that down and compress the leather a little bit, that's going to work really good. Let's do the other side. Looks about the same at both ends. Hallelujah. All right, continuing on. Next we want to cut these little retainer straps, for lack of a better term, that kind of keep the lid tethered to the wine caddy so you don't lose the lid. And you can see that this one here is pretty skinny. I don't think I need to cut it as skinny on this one because I didn't bevel the top edge of the lid as much as I did on this original one. So that allows me to use a little bit fatter one. And then the original here, I used copper tacks to attach this to the lid. I have some black oxide versions of these I think I'm going to use this time around. And hopefully they have enough holding power to keep this thing in place. And how long do I want those retainer straps to be? What I think I want them to be is the same length that the sides are wide. So basically from there to there, which I think is 3.5. Let me check that. Indeed, it's 3.5. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these retainer straps to 3.5 inches long. So there are my two 3.5 inch long strips. That will be my retainers. I want to knock these little corners off, kind of like little 45-degree bevels. So let's do that. And this part I'm just totally doing by eye. So I'm just going to knock that corner off at about a 45 right there. And then do the same thing right here. Not bad. So ultimately these little retainer straps are going to fit over the long handle strap, and I need to tack them down to the lid to hold them in place. So I'm going to have to punch holes here in order to figure out my hole locations. I know I want to put one kind of centered on the round end here, but I want to put a second one just for extra insurance and more stability in a little bit. So I'm kind of bending this with my fingers. I have it centered as best as I can get it by eye. And I'm going to press down and see that I want my other one to be in about 3/4 to 7/8, somewhere about there. So I'm going to go ahead and punch my holes for the tacks that are going to attach these little retainer straps to the lid, like that. Again, I can use the markings on the grid that's on my cutting mat. So here's 3/4 inch in. I'll put the edge right to that little dot there. And now I have a line going through here visually where I can line up my hole punch. Make sure that looks like it's in the middle, and we'll go ahead and punch that out. There's my second hole. So I'm going to repeat that for all the rest of the holes. So that is what our strap looks like so far. And because it's surface mounted, I'm going to be beveling the edges on the outside, not on the inside. So let's go ahead and do that with our edge beveler. So this is what our straps look like now. Now I just need to wax these edges and burnish them so they're not all rough and dried out like they are now. Now for the edge burnishing, I said part of the motivation for that was because these edges are really dry and rough. So in order to counteract that, I'm going to put some of this leather conditioner on here. The oils and waxes will soak in, and then we'll bevel the edges with our beveler here to make them nice and smooth and almost glossy. Once I get the leather conditioner on here, I think I'm going to wax it a little extra, either with some paste wax or what I call mountaintop joiner's wax. Now this stuff I just made myself. I very, very carefully melted some paste wax, some paraffin, and some beeswax into this big kind of chunk here. And this stuff is great for waxing plain soles, although I don't really use it for that. I just use paraffin for that. Or for waxing the sides of drawers so they slide super silky smooth. And I also like to use it for burnishing the edges of leather. So first things first though, I need to get this leather conditioner on here. So let me go ahead and shake it up. And I like to apply this bare-handed because it's actually really good for your skin, as far as I can tell. And I got a piece of paper towel here, and I'm just going to rub that in, especially focusing on these dry edges that we were talking about. All right, that's on there pretty good. I'm going to wipe off the excess off of my hands. Now my hands have been conditioned as well. Bet my wife would be impressed how not dry and flaked up my hands are like they usually are. Now let's try some of this mountaintop joiner's wax. And this is kind of a friction application, so I'm just taking one edge of it and rubbing it on there until I can see the wax starting to collect on the edges of the leather. And one of the advantages of using this particular wax mixture is that beeswax smells really good. So I'm smelling beeswax and leather and wood. This should make a cologne from these smells. Although I suppose that cologne would only attract other dudes, which is fine. Because we all know that dudes that do leatherworking or woodworking are pretty cool people, at least most of them. And burnish the leather edges so they're nice and silky smooth. So I got my burnisher now. I'm going to find the profile that best matches the edge of this leather, which I think is probably this one, and do the exact same thing. Kind of hard to get around these round edges, but not impossible. You can almost see a shine on the end of this now. It's nice and burnished and waxed. Whereas down here at the other hand, where I haven't done that yet, it still looks a little bit rough. It's going to continue that process all the way around the edges of all of the straps. All right, so now I got my straps ready to go, and while these are still a little bit kind of wetted up from the leather conditioner and wax and all that, I'm trying to form them over the strap like this. So I'm pressing down nice and hard on either side to get that little bit of bend in here to accommodate the carry handle. That's going to be a little bit important for transferring from the holes to where we need to drill into the edge of the lid here. All right, so to affix these little retainer straps to the lid here, I got chucked up in my leg vise. And what I'm going to be using are these little black oxide cut tacks that you can buy at pretty much any hardware store, I think. And they're very reminiscent of a forged cut nail, except kind of miniaturized. This is the kind of tack I believe they use to make tack strips for installing carpet or something. But from a decorative perspective, they work out really well for little things like this. So I'll just end up going on there like that. So in order to transfer the holes from these straps to the sides of the lid, you'll recall that I made the straps 3.5 inches to match the width of the sides of the wine caddy. Well, it turns out that the insert on the lid fits inside the wine caddy at exactly that width as well. So what I'm just going to do is line up the ends of this visually at each end like that. And then I'm going to come in here with my little birdcage awl that I've been using all this time and put tick marks in the end grain in those spots. So those are the 4 spots where I want to be able to drive one of these tacks. So like any cut tack, these are tapered on one side but not on the other. So what I'm looking at is how fat the untapered side of these tacks are. That appears to be about 3/32. So what I'm going to do is come in one size down from that in my drill bit, which would be 5/64, I think. Yeah, 5/64. So that's the size hole that I'm going to be drilling in this end grain. And there's my little blue tape flag for a depth stop, and you'll see that I'm put the flag such that the tip of the cut tack is still biting into solid wood here. And in transferring my marks, I'm also keeping track of which strap transferred which marks so they can go into the same spot again. If I were to put this strap on the other side where I use this strap to mark my holes, the holes won't line up and the strap won't line up very well with the edges of the lid here. Now I got my little 4-ounce Warrington pattern hammer here. I'm going to drive those tacks in with my carry handle strap attached. Just like that. So let's get one started here. It doesn't really matter which way these tacks are oriented because they're being driven into end grain. Otherwise, I would put the wedged part of the tack in line with the grain direction, and that gives you a nice solid hold. Pushing that most of the way in with my hands and knocking it into place. Tighten my vise a little bit. I'll do the one on the far end. And I'm purposely picking the longest tacks that are in the box here. And it still slides through there. That's what we want. Now I'm gonna do the other side, but I kind of have to hand hold it like this. Pull my strap over, line it up the way it was lined up earlier, start driving in my tacks. Give it a tap, tap, tappy tap. I almost forgot. Oh my goodness. So it's a good thing that I put this carry handle strap underneath the retention strap when I nailed these on, because I need to pull them out and I need to put my maker's badge on top of this lid. So I'll go ahead and pull these out, and hopefully it's not too hard to get them back in. I already punched the holes in this. So this is a leather disc that I had stamped for me because I have a maker's badge stamp that I don't have the tonnage to press into leather like this. So Jason over at Texas Heritage Woodworks, when he made my shop apron for me, he made some extra leather maker's mark badges for me with his clicker press using my stamp. So I'm going to line this up visually, and then I'm going to use my bird cage awl again to mark all these holes. There we go. And thankfully I already have my drill bit chucked up for those black oxide cut tacks, and I have the tape on there and everything, so I'm just going to drill all my holes for that. In this case there is a grain direction, so whatever the wedge shaped part of the cut tack is, I want it to wedge in line with the grain, and that gives it a tremendous amount of holding power. So this badge is never going to come off. So that's on, and I threaded the strap back in through there, and now it's looking pretty good. Okay, so now it's time to drill the holes for the screws that are going to hold the carry strap on. And for that I have my wine caddy laying on its side on top of my beach towel. I'm going to put some blue tape just in the vicinity of where those holes are going to go, just to protect the surface, just in case kind of thing. And then I'm going to grab my Incra T rule, and I'm going to mark in 2.5 inches from the top of the wine caddy and draw a line. Rather than do the math for finding the center line of the wine caddy side, I'm just going to plot my center finding rule down on here. 1 3/4 from each end. I'll mark that with bird cage awl and do the same thing on the other side again. And here's a fortuitous turn of events. So if I measure the root of these screws that I'm going to be using for this purpose, 3/32 in thickness. And it turns out I already have a drill bit chucked up in my drill that is just 1/64 smaller than that, and I don't really want these screws to hold, because this is what's going to hold the strap on the wine caddy. I don't want this to come out. So sizing down from that 3/32 makes sense to me, and it turns out that it's already just shy of the depth of the screw with the flag that's already on it from earlier. So I'm just going to leave this the way it is and drill in from the sides using that bit. something like that. I'm going to pull my blue tape off. So I'm going to look at each face of the Wine Caddy. I'm looking for imperfections in the finish. And it looks like there's something going on down here that's not, I don't know what that is, but it's not that pretty. So this, to my mind, is the good side of the Wine Caddy. So I'm going to orient my maker's badge this way so that this is the front of the Wine Caddy. And I'm going to line up my straps with the hole I just drilled. So where did that go? That is right about there. Ba, 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 bam, bam. Boom, 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 boom. All right then, so let's put a wine bottle in this thing and see how it looks. So I went into my wife's wine cabinet because I actually don't drink, true story. All alcohol tastes like fetid swamp water to me. So I went into my wife's stash because my wife drinks. And of all the fancy wines that she had, the only one that came in a Bordeaux style bottle happened to be Trader Joe's Grand Reserve. So not especially fancy, but we'll go ahead and pop the lid off of here. Pivot it back, drop this in to the middle. Then we're going to fit the lid over the top of the bottle and the Wine Caddy, and voila, there we go. So nicely displayed in there, easy to carry. You can swing it over your head probably, although I'm not going to try that because that just seems reckless. That is a Wine Caddy, all finished up and ready to go. Well, this concludes the longest video that I've ever done for YouTube, and not only that, it was part of a 6-part series. So this ended up being much more of a commitment than I anticipated when I started this project. A lot of time and effort went into making this series, but I hope it was worth it, because ultimately it wasn't about showing you how to build a Wine Caddy like this one. It was about showing you as many tips, tricks, and techniques as would typically pop up in a given project, particularly for the hand tool woodworker. So to that end, I hope that this series was a successful one. And if you agree with me that it was and that you want to send a little thanks my way, there is a way to do that. Somewhere around there is a little heart with a $sign inside it, and it says super thanks. If you click on that, you can send a donation my way and help support the channel that way. I certainly would appreciate that. And I don't know what's next for the channel. I have some ideas though, so you'll probably see me again pretty soon, and I hope to see you again as well. So I'll catch you later. Now, if you like what you saw here, please hit like and subscribe. It would help me out a lot. Also hit the little bell icon if you want to be notified anytime I release a new video. And if you didn't like what you saw here, keep it to yourself, pal. Or watch one of my other videos. You might like one of those. Thank you for watching.